The Arizona Cardinals head into next year with a ton of anticipation, and with a lot of draft capital and a lot of already really good players, the pressure is on for this Arizona Cardinals team to take some big steps next year. So today, I want to talk about the Arizona Cardinals and where I think this team is heading into next year. So the way I'm going to be breaking this down is by breaking it down into a few segments. We're going to begin by talking about why I think there's a lot of anticipation about why this Cardinals team could be good next year, and then the opposite side of things of why I think this team may not be so good next year. And at the very end of the video, I'll give you guys my synopsis on this Arizona Cardinals team and how good I think they can be heading into next year and heading into the future. So as I mentioned, we're going to begin by talking about why I think this Cardinals team could actually be pretty solid next year. And I think the number one reason why I believe this team could be good next year is, well, they have Kyler Murray. Despite not really being able to stay healthy these past couple of seasons, when he has been playing, he's still been a very productive player. Last year when he was the quarterback, it was very obvious that this Cardinals team did take a massive step forward. Now, were they winning a ton of games and putting up a ton of numbers? Not necessarily, but there was a certain feeling within the Cardinals fan base and within that Cardinals team that they were a better team with Kyler Murray, which is of course the obvious thing, especially when you have guys like Clayton Tune getting your starting position. Kyler Murray is one of those weird quarterbacks where it's really hard to rank him in like your top 10, but I think he's like borderline on that level. I will say for the most part, I think he's a super underrated quarterback in this league, but it's also something where it's like, I don't quite know if I want to say that he is the most underrated quarterback, but I also don't know if he's super underrated within the fan base. I feel like the fan base probably ranks him a lot higher than what the general fans in the NFL do. I have Kyler Murray in my top 15, but I really struggle to put him in my top 10. Regardless though, I still think that when he's healthy and when he's playing on good teams, Kyler Murray is one of the better quarterbacks in the league. It's really hard to rank Kyler Murray in your top 10 because this Cardinals team has just been god awful these past couple years, and now that the team is starting to head in the right direction, I think that Kyler Murray will get better and better and better as the roster around him gets better. Let's not forget how good Kyler Murray was when DeAndre Hopkins was there and that team was actually rolling. Obviously the season did not end the way they wanted to, but early on in that year, they were one of the best teams in the league. The next thing I like about this team is I like certain positions on this offense, mainly the left tackle, the running back, and their tight end room. As it sits right now, your offensive line as a whole is a little bit weird. We'll talk about them in just a second, but Paris Johnson Jr., despite having kind of an up and down rookie season, did show his potential of being worthy of that number 6 overall pick. Paris Johnson is a unproven player who's going to take time to develop, but when he was healthy last year and when he was playing, I thought there was a lot of really good signs that he was one of the better offensive tackles from that last year's draft. I think long term he's going to be a very good solution for that left tackle position, and I'm very intrigued to see what the general outlook for his upcoming season may look like. The rest of the offensive line, however, is a little bit mediocre. We'll talk about them in just a second though. Then I like James Conner a lot. I might be one of the few guys out there who accurately does rank James Conner within their top 15. I think James Conner is a super underrated player, and I think last year he definitely did prove that. Does he go out there and have the big flashy runs like a Devon A-Chain or Tony Pollard? Not necessarily, but he does get the dirty yards and is just a very proven productive player. On a lot of Arizona Cardinals teams that just did not have very good offensive lines, James Conner was still a very productive player. Then looking in the tight end room, Trey McBride had a very big breakout season last year. Last year in his second season, he had 825 yards on 81 receptions and 3 touchdowns. And honestly, he was probably their best wide receiving weapon on the team last year. I mean, hell, their wide receiver 1 last year was Michael Wilson, who I do think has a lot of potential to be pretty solid. So does a guy like Greg Dortch and maybe Chris Moore at some points. So offensively speaking, I do think that there are certain positions that I definitely think are adequate to get the job done. Again, running back, quarterback, tight end, left tackle, and even some other positions along the offensive line. Like I think Will Hernandez is pretty solid. Defensively, I do have a lot of issues with the roster. I do somewhat like how they're currently constructed with a lot of younger players playing in their dedicated position. For example, I think BJ Ojulari and Zaven Collins have some really good potential at the defensive line position. They also brought in some guys like Mac Wilson Sr., who I do think could be a solid linebacker player alongside a guy like Kazir White. They also brought in Sean Murphy Bunting to be their true cornerback 1 heading into next year. This was a team that really could use a proven player in that secondary, so getting a guy like a Sean Murphy Bunting made a ton of sense to me. Looking at the safety position, you have 2 really good players, and of course Buda Baker and Jalen Thompson, so I think you have to be pretty happy about where your secondary is heading in general. And I think a big reason why this defense has taken some strides forward is because of their coaching staff. Last year, Jonathan Gannon did a very good job of taking a team with not a lot of talent and at least making them a competitive group of guys. Again, when your defensive line is as poor as this team's is as a total, and as poor as what the secondary was looking like throughout most of last year, being able to have competent and competitive games is a lot more of a say less on your players as it is more on your coaching staff. It appears to me like this coaching staff does get the best out of what they have. And the last thing I'll talk about for why I think this team could be a good team next year is they have a ton of draft picks next year. Hell, they have 3 3 third-round picks, 1 second-round pick, and 2 first-round picks. I fully anticipate them to just kind of go best player available in positions of needs for each of those picks. I think with their first-round pick, they'll probably take Marvin Harrison Jr. With their second first-round pick, it probably will be somebody on the defense, maybe a cornerback or a defensive lineman. With your second-round pick, again, best player available, and same thing follows suit for those 3 third-round picks. I think what makes the NFL draft so interesting is those guys who fall out of the first round and into the second round and where they actually go in the second round. I think Arizona is in a good position to just take best player available at every single pick, so they're going to get great value and great bang for their buck. But now let's talk about the opposite side of things. Why I think this Arizona Cardinals team has a lot of work to do before we can call them underrated or even decent next year. And for me, it's a lot of personnel changes that need to happen. Again, now they can fix a lot of these personnel problems in the draft. However, it's a lot more difficult to find great draft picks in the third round than it is in the first round, so you're a little bit limited with how good the players could be. But I at least wanted to mention these positions as positions that I am concerned about, and I just don't know if a young rookie is going to be able to go in there and immediately fix that entire room in general. Number one thing, I think that Garrett Williams has shown his potential at times. This is a young player who was taken in the third round of last year and definitely had some flashes, but I just don't know if he's your true cornerback 2 heading into next year. I think if that's the case, then I do have some question marks about this roster, especially in that secondary. I would love to see this team go out there and get potentially like a Terran Arnold or a Kool-Aid McKinstry in this year's draft. I just don't know if they're going to be available with their second first round pick. Outside of the secondary, I think, again, as I mentioned earlier, the defensive line has a lot of work to do. I do, again, like Zaven Collins and BJ Ojulari, but those are guys who just really haven't proven to me that they are going to be even decent players in the NFL. BJ Ojulari only had 4 sacks last year, and even though I still think he's going to be a very good player in this league, it still has not quite been showcased out on the field quite yet. Zaven Collins has kind of rotated into more of that pass rushing guy, and he only has 5.5 sacks through 3 years of his career. So I think all in all, having a edge rushing duo of Zaven Collins, LJ Collier, or BJ Ojulari just is not going to get the job done. Not to mention your 2 interior defensive linemen are not really big pass rush upside guys. I will say Justin Jones does have some pass rush upside. Last year he had 4.5 sacks and did a very good job of being a disruptor up the middle for his respective team. But I just don't know if there's anybody on this defensive line who really just scares offensive linemen. I think most offensive lines will be able to handle this Arizona Cardinals defensive line pretty easily. And I think if this defense does want to take that next step, then fixing this defensive line should be at least number 1 priority, if not number 2 priority. The next thing I don't really love about this team and why I kind of question where they're going direction-wise is their offensive line has a lot of big-time holes. They brought in Jonah Williams to be their stopgap right tackle of the future, but paying him as much as they did, I didn't really like the move. I think Jonah Williams is a very below-average, injury-prone offensive tackle who just don't know how much his upside really is. The rest of your offensive line is Elijah Wilkinson, Will Hernandez, who I talked about earlier, who I actually do like, Tristan Colin, and then your current center is Halt for Holt or Evan Brown. I do think that Evan Brown could potentially push for that starting center position, but all in all, I just think this offensive line is just kind of okay, not great. And I think in the NFL, if you want to have a fantastic team, you really need to have a fantastic offensive line. And I just don't know right now if any of these guys are going to turn out to be fantastic players outside of like a Paris Johnson Jr. The other thing that I don't really like about this team is I do think their wide receiving core does need a ton of help, even more so than just a Marvin Harrison Jr. I fully expect Marvin Harrison Jr. to be the receiver 1 heading into next year. If not Marvin Harrison, then probably like a Malik Neighbors or Roma Dunze. I think all those guys are very good. But then outside of those guys, you do have Michael Wilson and Greg Dortch, and I just don't know quite yet if Michael Wilson is ready to be a true wide receiver 2 in the league. I think next year it's more than competent enough, but I think when this team becomes who we think this team could be, is it going to be good enough to get the Super Bowls? Is it good enough to be able to win divisions and win playoff games? I don't know. So I think all in all, I think there's a lot of personnel changes that need to happen. Again, wide receiving group needs a lot of overhauling. I think the offensive line needs a lot of overhauling. I think the defensive line could also use a lot of overhauling and a lot of pieces in general. And I also think the secondary could also use some cornerbacks to add alongside Sean Murphy-Bunting. Now, before I give you guys my synopsis, I want to make this very clear. They have a ton of draft picks to add a lot of different pieces along these issues that I have with this roster. But with that being said, you're expecting a lot out of a lot of third round and second round players. Again, you only have 2 first round picks unless you decide to trade up. And while I fully expect for them to have a fantastic and franchise altering draft, I think it's time that we temper our expectations for this Cardinals team just a tad bit. I've seen some Cardinals fans say that they are playoff contenders, and I just don't want to get your expectations too high heading into next year. So now let me give you guys my synopsis. And my synopsis is this. I think this team is heading in the right direction. Do I think they're going to be a deadly team next year? No. Do I think they're going to be an underrated team next year? Not necessarily. I do think this is a team that could potentially shock a couple of really good teams. Like if they go up against a Kansas City or a Green Bay or one of the better teams in the NFL, I do think Arizona could actually put up a very good fight. I just don't know if they're going to be much improved from last year because because of how many issues I think this roster does have. Now, with that being said, last year they won 4 games. I expect them to take a step forward next year to win at least 6 to 7 games with a healthy Kyler Murray and an improved roster. I think this is another step in the right direction for this franchise as they are looking to rebuild into becoming a contender at some point. Next year, you're going to develop a lot of younger players, and the year after that, you're going to develop even more younger players while also bringing in some veterans and some big contract guys to help fill in certain positions. I think this year is going to be sort of a big learning year for this franchise, and I think in 2025 and 2026, we'll see this team start to take steps into becoming the Chicago Bears or the Green Bay Packers team of the 2024 season. So I don't think this team will be fantastic next year, but I think they'll be taking a slight step forward, and then eventually they'll start taking some big steps forward to become a really good team. But if you guys disagree, let me know in the comment section below. What do you guys think about this Arizona Cardinals team? And if you enjoyed the video, hit the like and subscribe button, and I love you guys. Peace.